What's your reaction to the verdict?
I thought it was a good verdict. I think the charge of helping the enemy was excessive, and I think it was good that the judge acquitted him of that charge. But I think what Manning did was appalling. I think he betrayed his fellow members of the military, he betrayed the Foreign Service, and he should be going to prison, and he will be.
Glenn, I know you disagree.
I do. I think the verdict, and I also think that Jeff's comments kind of underscore what a lot of people really hate about Washington, which is that if you're sufficiently rich and powerful and well-connected in Washington, the laws don't apply to you, you don't get punished. The only people who do are people like Bradley Manning. The theory that the government used, one of which was not successful, but many of which were, was that he engaged in espionage and helped the enemy because the material that he caused to be published on the internet ended up being helpful to Osama bin Laden. Bob Woodward has written book after book after book and has become extremely rich by publishing secrets way more sensitive than anything Bradley Manning ever published. Nothing that Manning published was top secret, unlike what Bob Woodward publishes. And yet nobody I would ever talk about Bob Woodward the way that Jeff Toobin just did, or his sources, because he's in good standing in Washington. His sources are high-level officials in the White House. They leak all the time. Washington is nothing about leaks. And yet the only people who get punished for it are people who are marginalized in Washington, and that's a broader reflection of how the law is abused.
Jeff, what about that? Because you do have people leaking all the time for political reasons.
You do have some leaking going on, and we can have a debate on a case-by-case basis, but Bradley Manning released 700,000 cables, including the life's work of a lot of Foreign Service officers who risk their lives, and the people they talk to risk their lives to talk to American officials. And the idea that Bradley Manning has the right and that was somehow justified in releasing this material, I think is just completely wrong. And Bob Woodward is a separate story and unrelated as far as I'm concerned.
Glenn, does a government, in your opinion, have any right to any form of secrecy? Secrecy in their diplomatic cables, secrecy in their, the foreign policy discussions that go on in embassies overseas? Because those are the things that were in a lot of the cables that Bradley Manning released.
The government has limited rights to secrecy, but it is so wildly abused. I mean, the argument that people made when these diplomatic cables were released was, well, there's nothing really significant or newsworthy or new in these cables. Well, then why were they all marked secret? The reason is because the government just reflexively marks everything secret. And the thing that I find most bizarre is that anybody who would go into the field of journalism or call themselves a journalist, who would call for the prosecution and imprisonment for decades of a source like Bradley Manning, who, as I said, didn't publish anything top secret the way that most sources for large media outlets in America do all the time. It's baffling. What Bradley Manning did is the job of journalists, which is to bring transparency to what the government is doing. And even the Pentagon admits that its early claims about how he has blood on his hands and there was all this damage was wildly overstated. He released very low-level secrets that inform the world about the U.S. government and harm nobody.
But it's not up to Bradley Manning to make the decision to disclose this. I mean, these are people who, the people who wrote those cables have devoted their lives to trying to make the world a better place, particularly Foreign Service officers. Maybe you disagree about that, Glenn, but I admire the Foreign Service a great deal. And, I trust their judgment about what's a secret a lot more than I do Bradley Manning's.
Right, and look, Jeff, you can make that argument in every leak case. I mean, people back in the 1960s said Daniel Ellsberg was a traitor. Who was Daniel Ellsberg to decide what should be leaked to the American public? I trust U.S. generals way more than some Daniel Ellsberg who I never voted for, and yet what Daniel Ellsberg did was expose systematic lies on the part of the U.S. government. In the Bush years, people said whoever told Dana Priest at the Washington Post that the Bush administration had secret CIA prisons, or whoever told the New York Times that the Bush administration was spying without warrants, what right did they have to disclose secrets? This is how journalism, investigative journalism works, Jeff, is that people inside the government with a conscience come forward when they find out things that their government is doing that are wrong, and they disclose it to the world through media outlets and journalism. If you think that's criminal, you're essentially calling for the end of investigative journalism. That is what investigative journalism is about.
No, I appreciate your education to me of what journalism is, but releasing 700,000 cables in a completely blunderbuss way is not the same as the work of Dana Priest and Bob Woodward.